Let us pay homage to the Buddha. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Let us take the three refuges. Buddhang saranang gacchami, Dhammang saranang gacchami, Sanghang saranang gacchami, Dutiyampi Buddhang saranang gacchami, Dutiyampi Dhammang saranang gacchami, Dutiyampi Sanghang saranang gacchami, Tatiyampi Buddhang saranang gacchami, Tatiyampi Dhammang saranang gacchami, Tatiyampi Sanghang saranang gacchami. Okay, we shall now chant the verses to observe the 5 precepts. Panatipata veramani sikkhapadang samadhiyami. Adinadana veramani sikkhapadang samadhiyami. Kamesu miccācara veramani sikkhapadang samadhiyami. Musavada veramani sikkhapadang samadhiyami. Sura meraya majja pamadatthana veramani sikkhapadang samadhiyami. Sadhu, sadhu, sadhu.
Dear brothers and sisters of the Dhamma, today we are very happy to have Ajahn Achalo to give a talk on the topic Stream Entry, an Impossible Dream or Not. Ajahn Achalo, the founding abbot of Wat Anandagiri in Phetchaburi, Thailand, was born in Australia in 1972. He developed a keen interest in meditation at the age of 20 and a year later left for Thailand to study Buddhism more intensely. Ajahn Achalo ordained as a monk in 1996 under Ajahn Liam at Wat Pah Pong. Although most of his training has taken place in Thailand, Ajahn Achalo has also lived in several international forest monasteries in the Ajahn Chah's lineage. For most of his bhikkhu life, he has considered Ajahn Anan, abbot of Wat Mat Jan, to be his principal mentor. Ajahn Achalo generously shares his teachings to the world via the website www.peacebeyondsuffering.org.
Trying to notice the beginning, middle and end of the in-breath for the first few minutes. Sometimes it's good to observe the breath at the nose, chest and abdomen. Abdomen, chest, nose, as the breath comes in and out. Training the mind to take the feeling of the breath, awareness of the breath as the meditation object. Aware of the breath as it comes in, nose, chest, abdomen. Aware of the feelings involved with the out breath, abdomen, chest, nose. Sometimes using mantra, or as we call in Pali, parikamma. Parikamma word can be useful, gently restraining the thinking mind. It's a gentle mental recitation on the in-breath, Buddho. On the out-breath, Buddho. Breathing in, knowing the entire in-breath, Buddho. Breathing out, knowing the entire out-breath, Buddho. We're taking the breath as the meditation object. We change the way we relate to thoughts and thinking, not trying to think a thought, simply being aware of a thought as a thought, giving the interest to feeling of the breathing, allowing the thought to fall away. Knowing the entire in-breath, the natural breath, knowing the entire out-breath. Mindfully aware. As the thoughts calm down, quieten down, we can change the mental recitation, making it simpler, more spacious. Breathing in, Buddha. Breathing out, Buddha. Buddha, synonymous with wakefulness, mindfulness, mindful awareness. Wonderful thing about the breath is that it is constantly changing and that it is always with us. So if we take breath as the meditation object, we have to have a consistent quality of mindfulness. A wonderful object for training us to truly be in the present. not allowing the mind to run off with thoughts about the past, thoughts about the future, thoughts about other people, other places. Simply being present in the body, aware of the body sitting, aware of the feelings involved in and out breathing, using the mental recitation to keep the mind gently with the task. Breathing in thought and breathing out thought. One in breath full, one out breath down, resting in mindful awareness, resting with the awareness of breathing. Just a minute or so to go, enjoying, taking the opportunity, allowing the mind to center, to rest. One in breath full, one out breath down. And that brings us to the end of our guided meditation. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Buddhang Dhammang Sanghang Namasami. So I've been requested to give some Dhamma reflection. I was actually sent a short list of possible subjects. I asked the organizers what subjects they thought might be helpful, and I was sent a short list that I could choose one from. And one of those questions was, is Sotapanna an impossible dream? And I answered that I will give some comments on the question, Sotapanna, an impossible dream or not? So what is Sotapanna first? Sotapanna is a Pali word which means stream enterer. So what kind of stream are we entering? So this was the phrase, we need to mute somebody. Okay. So that phrase was a phrase that Lord Buddha used to describe when a practitioner had an experience of Nibbana, a stable, clear enough experience of Nibbana that the mind changed lineages from the worldly being to the noble being. And noble being means a class of enlightened being. I should just preface this talk with, normally I would talk a little faster, but this subject is a bit tricky and I have to choose my words very carefully. So this will be a slowly paced talk. So, noble being, Aryan being, Arya Pukala, meaning a class of enlightened being. Somebody destined to be an Arahant. Lord Buddha explained that once a person attained to the stream entry, insight, level of insight, that it would be impossible to have a more than a seventh human birth. So we have in the sutras you will see quite often that during a teaching that Lord Buddha gives, by the end of the talk, certain Anya Kondanya, for example, while Lord Buddha taught the first sermon, by the end of the teaching, he was a Sotapanna. Through having had the insight, all that is of the nature to arise is of the nature to cease. In subsequent days, Lord Buddha continued to teach the first 5 disciples, the Panchavati, and he taught the Anattalakkhana Sutta, sutta on not self. And by the end of that sermon, all 5 of those first disciples were arahants. So we can see by this that when a person's spiritual faculties have been developed to be spiritual powers, the 5 faculties, the 5 powers, faith, energy, mindfulness, concentration, and wisdom, when those qualities are powerful, then the mind can actually attain to the noble lineage or experience liberation. It's probably a better way of describing it, is experience the liberated mind. So when the spiritual powers are powerful enough, that is not such a great leap. The issue then is, many people would like to know how developed their spiritual powers are. And they would like to know, if they practice really hard, how long will it take exactly? And there are other suttas where Lord Buddha says, I think it's the Satipatthana Sutta, where Lord Buddha does say that if a person understands and practices cultivating mindfulness in the 4 foundations, that by the end of 7 days, that person could be an arahant. And then he goes on further, if they don't do it in 7 days, then possibly in 7 weeks. If not in 7 weeks, then possibly in 7 years. So some people get the sense then that it might not be that difficult, it might be quite easy, and they try really, really hard for a period of time. And they might have the experience that after 7 days, they're not an arahant. And after 7 weeks, they're also not an arahant. And then we start to be hopeful that maybe after 7 years. And then for some people, 7 years go by and it's still not arahant. So we shouldn't lose heart. What I think the Lord Buddha is pointing to here very clearly is that it's perfectly something that is perfectly attainable, or something that can be accomplished when one's spiritual faculties, when one's spiritual faculties or spiritual powers are developed enough. That is important. It is a factor. And 2, when one is practicing correctly with the right methods of cultivating the right things. So in that sutta, he's talking about cultivating, developing mindfulness and insight by being aware of the 4 foundations of mindfulness. So for a practitioner to be able to experience arahantship within 7 days, that would mean that their mindfulness and wisdom is extremely well developed, and that when they apply themselves at developing their insight, they will, they will be being extremely consistent in their practice. So this is what having strong spiritual powers makes possible, is the quality of consistency. So many people have experience of doing their morning practice or their evening practice, but then throughout the day can get quite lost in other things. That's normal. What I would like to suggest, however, is I personally believe that there are still arahants in the world. And I personally believe that I know some of them. And for me, this suggests something. For me, it's obvious. If there are still arahants in the world, if it is possible for beings to have experienced the highest fruit of practicing mindfulness and insight alive in the world today, then of course it's possible to attain, for other beings to attain to the lower levels of enlightenment. For me, that's that's the obvious sign. The enlightenment lineage, the living enlightenment practice, tradition, and lineage still has realized beings. So yes, Sotapanna is possible. There are other phrases that come up in suttas. One very short teaching, one of my favorite teachings. Luminous is the mind. It is darkened by adventitious kilesa. Luminous is the mind. Very short teaching, simply explaining that qualities take advantage of a situation and darken the mind. But the nature of the mind itself is something that can be purified. Those dark qualities can be eradicated. There are other examples in the sutra. I think there was one very gifted practitioner who could, I think he was called a skywalker many eons ago, who had ability to fly through the sky, and he was trying to find the end of the universe. And so he went and he went and he went. I can't remember exactly how many leagues, but he went a truly great distance and he couldn't find the end of the universe. So then he came back and then asked the Buddha, how do I put an end to this? But he thought that if he could find the end of the universe, he could put an end to suffering. And then the Buddha said, the previous Buddha explained, do not seek the end of the universe. Your liberation is possible within this fathom-long body. And that's another very poignant and powerful teaching. It suggests several things. In having a body and in having consciousness attached to the body, we already have everything that we need. It's right there. And Lord Buddha has also pointed us at where we need to look inside, within the body. And when we have the teachings on the four foundations of mindfulness, knowing the body as a body, being aware of the posture of the body, the movement of the body, being aware of feelings which arise due to bodily contact, being aware of emotions, etc., mind objects, and then being aware of dhammas, wholesome, neutral, unwholesome, knowing the texture and quality of the mind. But it is within this area, around this body, is where the insight that will liberate you from having to have bodies. That's where it occurs. With regards to the question, is stream entry possible? So I think in considering in these ways, it definitely is. The next question, I suppose, is stream entry probable? That's a different question. And a lot will depend upon two different things, three things. First is, how much practice did you do in previous lives? Second, do you have the correct methods? Do you know how to develop mindfulness, concentration, and wisdom? The third, very important, how consistently will you practice? So if you've done some practice in the past, and probably most of us have, it's of the 7 billion plus human beings in the world, it's a fairly small percentage that listen to wisdom reflections from practicing monks and nuns who actually study the core teachings of Buddha Dhamma. So for people to have an interest, to have come in contact with it, there must be powerful previous causes. So I think it's good to be confident that we've studied Buddha Dhamma before, and we've practiced Buddha Dhamma before. How much exactly, I don't know. And how consistently and how sincerely, I don't know. But enough to have met the teachings. And I think in Singapore and Malaysia, probably coming in contact with monks and nuns from several lineages, and you may not have the same quality of very strong and powerful, unwavering faith that I have in the lineage that I'm a part of. But for myself, believe that is extremely good fortune for all of us, actually, that we met the disciples in the practice lineage of Luang Por Man. Because Luang Por Man is kind of like a grandfather figure, great-grandfather figure, but it wasn't that long ago. Last century, this great, incredibly gifted meditator who actually attained to stream entry, he attained to all of the noble paths and fruits within one lifetime. And I personally think that that's a little bit unusual. And it was explained in his biography that his students wrote on his behalf. He didn't write an autobiography. A biography was written about him by his students, various things that he'd said. He had abilities to review past lives, and he had abilities to read other people's minds. He was a very developed practitioner. And he said of himself that it had been 500 lives since the time that he could have attained to arahantship. However, he had aspired to be a Buddha. And he had spent an extra 500 lives cultivating higher virtue, extra levels of samadhi, extra discriminating wisdom, etc. But when it came to this life, he was reviewing the situation, and he had the insight that the Bodhisattva path is extremely long. Although he had spent an additional 500 lives since the time that he could have been an arahant, there was still an extremely long way to go. He felt that he'd only come a very small way, and so he resolved that he would actually relinquish the aspiration to be a Buddha, and he would intend to put an end to defilement in that life. And he did. And fortunately, he had enough disciples who wrote down the details for these his incredible efforts. So, and then we have Luang Por Chah. Luang Por Chah didn't spend very long with Luang Por Man, but he considered him one of his main teachers, and he considered himself a disciple of Luang Por Man, because he'd been wrestling with some doubts, and after a conversation with Luang Por Man, he was able to resolve those doubts and focus where he needed to focus on his practice. And then he also started to experience some deeper paths and fruits in his practice. So my personal feeling about the disciples of Luang Por Man, those who became arahants, is that I suspect that a good number of them were born as stream enterers, because it'd be quite unusual to go from stream enterer, Sakadagami, once returner, Anagami, non-returner, and arahant within one lifetime in this day and age. That is unusual. So the monks that I have faith in, Tanatan Biek, Tanatan Dan, Tanatan Ana, Tanatan Lian, these are the ones that I don't have any doubts about, great confidence in. These monks tended to have amazing samadhi even as lay people, and a very strong quality of faith, and became monks at a young age and developed quite quickly in their practice. So I think they were well established. But I just want to reiterate the fact that these kind of beings are still being born in the world, practicing correctly, and experiencing within this lifetime in recent history paths and fruits, then I think that's all of the evidence we need. These are the examples that we need to feel confident that it definitely is possible. And then our particular good fortune is, I know somebody who lived and trained with Luang Por Chah. Luang Por Chah lived and trained with Luang Por Man and other great monks, Luang Por Sao, Luang Por Kinari. And so this enlightenment lineage, we know people who are part of that, living examples. And so the teachings that they are telling you will work, and the practices that they are telling you will work, are the teachings and the practices that worked for them. So we can derive great confidence from this. And then it's just nice to point you in the direction of these monks, because these are the ones that I have confidence in the enlightenment lineage of Luang Por Man, very well practiced, very good understanding. And I had the good fortune of being quite close to Ajahn Achalo, spending 5 rainy season retreats with him. I'm still quite close with him. And we're very fortunate in as much as Ajahn is very energetic with his teaching and very encouraging with his teaching. Even though he's 67 years old, he still has a lot of energy, a lot of compassion, and a lot of interest in helping to train people. So the teachers are there. The teachings are there. The examples of enlightened beings are still there. So what remains then is for us to maintain a consistent effort with focus. So if we were talking about the possibility of stream entry, yes, it's possible. Then we're talking about the probability. So what can we do? It's a good question. Another question, another way of framing this subject is, what can I do to make stream entry more probable, more likely? And then I would suggest it's strict keeping of ethical precepts, practicing meditation, formal meditation, several times a day. The formal meditation time is the time when you sharpen your mindfulness and your wisdom, so that you can bring it into your day and be mindful in all postures and develop a different kind of wisdom in your more ordinary daily life. But we have to generate the mindfulness in the morning, establish a sense of clarity, and take care of that mindfulness and clarity throughout the day. Because if you establish a little bit of clarity in the morning, but then you darken the mind and experience a lot of cloudedness and darkness throughout the day, you've taken one step forward and one step back. And you can see that won't really get you very far. However, if you generate some clarity in the morning, and then you generate more clarity at the end of the day, and if you do that every day, then the power of, I'm using the word clarity, presence of mind, that's what mindfulness with clear comprehension is. You generate a sense of presence of mind, you generate a sense of clarity by dropping the things which cloud the mind, the 5 hindrances. So we have to do this, we have to engage in an energetic practice that helps bring the power of clarity and presence of mind to have more power than the power of darkness and confusion. Ajahn Achalo says that the 8-spoked Dhamma wheel, the eightfold path, the symbol of the eightfold path, is actually something which turns in the mind. It's not a picture, it's not a list, it's a list of qualities that function, path factors. When the path factors are functioning, they're turning in the mind, they are literally destroying greed, hatred, and delusion. They're grinding them up. But when the path factors aren't functioning in the mind, the greed, hatred, and delusion are actually destroying the path factors. So this is why getting ahead in practice requires consistency. We really do need to be consistent. And I think the best approach to have is one of slowly but steadily increasing and not allowing for a falling back. So you can't, sometimes people, they have these kind of fits and starts, bursts of energy and then periods of laziness. And we all know by now that that doesn't get us anywhere. And I think it was probably a much better strategy. If you're doing a 45-minute sit now, then you determine that you will add, if you're doing 45 minutes in the morning, you will add 15 minutes before you sleep. It's not that hard to do. Or if you're doing 45 minutes before you sleep, you will add 15 minutes before you go to work or do what you do in the day. Once you've established that for a few months, you extend your 15 minutes to a half an hour. So now you're doing 45 minutes in the morning, a half an hour in the evening. And just be absolutely determined. You're not giving it 1 minute. You're not going to let laziness or greed, hatred, and delusion to wrestle this out of your grasp. You are only going to increase. Obviously, if there's traveling, sickness, an occasional exception, okay. But a general standard is that you're going to do more practice. Once you've established that, perhaps you do that for a year. Then my suggestion would be 45 minutes, and add an afternoon period as well, if you can. Some people will be thinking, but the Buddha said to be mindful in all postures. Why so much emphasis on the formal practice? In the ordinary waking day, we have to be honest about the fact that there is a self-view. There is me and there is you. There's my thoughts, my opinions. When you're trying to take care of your mindfulness throughout your day, you're trying to keep your mind states wholesome, you're trying to keep your speech wholesome, trying not to get in conflicts, you're trying to have loving kindness, but there is a lot of self-view present. You're still making karma with self-view. The insight that we're aiming for is an insight into not-self. So we have to give ourselves opportunities where we aren't creating a self and others in a world. So we have to keep pulling back. And then when we go back into working with conventional reality, understanding conventions, you don't make a problem out of it. You try to be a nice person, be friendly, be kind. Don't try to not be yourself. You understand conventional reality is conventional reality. Navigate it skillfully. But you want to be getting more and more breaks from it, where you come to sit and after 5 or 10 or 15 minutes, there's a feeling of clarity and spaciousness and no particular feeling of a self. Not thinking about other people, not thinking about the past, not thinking about the future, abiding with presence of mind and clarity that sees a body as a body, thoughts as thoughts, feelings as feelings, not I, not mine. And we need to be experiencing that consistently more and more, because that's the quality of clarity. You see, if the self-view is based on ignorance, and the more we feed it, the more we feed ignorance. It's like a negative feedback loop. That's what feeds greed, hatred, and delusion. Being a self in a world, thinking about the world, having opinions about the world, plans and all these things. When you establish presence of mind, clarity of mind, and see a body as a body, thoughts as thoughts, feelings as feelings, arising and ceasing, that's weakening ignorance. That's not making karma with worlds. That's making karma with something that will lead you beyond worlds. Lord Buddha explains that his teaching leads to heaven and beyond. So when we're a good person, keeping ethical precepts, being generous, developing loving kindness, that's leading to heaven. When you are diligent in your meditation and you're cultivating insight, trying to see these things as not self, observing the arising and ceasing, arising and ceasing, arising and ceasing, that's leading to beyond heaven. That's leading to Nibbana. And we need to be doing both. Ajahn Achalo says that we make ourselves like devas, Kalyana Chon. So we were talking before about the Patujana and the Aryajana, the worldly being and the noble being. There's something in between. It's called the Kalyana Jana, the lovely being. So we train in being a lovely being. Ajahn Achalo also uses the word manusatevo, a human being with an angel's mind. That's the foundation for insight. Maintaining ethical precepts, being a person who forgives, who practices patience, who practices contentment, who develops loving kindness. That's the humble self that is going to be able to develop insight. But if we want to develop insight, we have to make our mindfulness, concentration, and wisdom have the power to weaken and uproot delusion. So we have to take those moments where we're not feeding the delusion and developing the remedy which uproots delusion. And it can only be done by consistent practice. So in my own experience, people sometimes wonder, when I was practicing in Bodhgaya, why I decided to practice 10 hours a day, sitting meditation 10 hours a day. It's very interesting when you're a practicing monk. You think that good monks who keep the rules and meditate a lot will just receive a lot of praise and everybody appreciates everything that they do, but that's not the case. A lot of people were critical. Ajahn Achalo is attached to the sitting posture. Ajahn Achalo is attached to jhanas. Ajahn Achalo is attached to samadhi. Ajahn Achalo obviously just wants psychic powers. All of these people who didn't ask me what I'm actually doing, coming up with opinions and judgments and criticizing me and saying my efforts were wrong by looking at the outside. I assure you, when you sit for 10 hours a day under the Bodhi tree in Bodhgaya, you are going to be having to cultivate mindfulness of the four foundations of mindfulness, because there will be pain that you will have to practice patient endurance with and contemplate. There will be unpleasant noises, unpleasant smells, unpleasant feelings of heat and cold and mosquitoes and any number of things that give you an excellent opportunity to practice noticing the arising and ceasing of feelings. For myself, I found that it was because of my great faith in Lord Buddha and my love for that holy site that was the place where I could meditate 10 hours a day consistently. So that's why I went there again and again and again. And my experience of practicing more consistently is, normally it's a bit like this. There's an initial period of inspiration when you get there for the first few days. And then you realize after 4 or 5 days, oh God, do I really have to do this for another month? And this is very important, because the sense of self, which is inspired and excited and which is going to get enlightened, he actually has to fall away as well. And what has to remain is the commitment to practice that is going to do it when you want to, when you don't want to, when you're inspired, when you're not inspired, when you're awake, when you're sleepy, when you feel like you have the energy to do it, and when you feel like you don't have the energy to do it. Because when you keep establishing mindfulness again, come back to the breath, come back to the breath, then what happens is the mindfulness gets very powerful. And when you're practicing when you want to and when you don't want to, when you're inspired and when you're not inspired, when you're enjoying it and when you're not enjoying it, that's when you develop insight into the nature of mind states arising and ceasing. And Ajahn Chah also teaches us this. He says the correct way to practice is, when you're lazy, you practice, and when you're diligent, you practice. When you want to practice, you practice, and when you don't want to practice, you practice. When you're peaceful, you practice, and when you're not peaceful, you practice. And so this is how we develop strong mindfulness, which has the integrity to observe the impermanence of the mind states. And that noticing the moment of cessation, that's what happens the more we meditate. If you have a half an hour or 45-minute practice, you'll come to practice, there might be some mind states, some thoughts about the day. You might get some peace after 20 minutes, a little bit of peace, and then. But if you meditate hours, you will see many different mind states arise and stay for some time, including peaceful mind states. You'll have a very peaceful mind state, but then the mind will come out of that peaceful state, and you'll see the arising of peace, the degeneration of peace. You see a more ordinary mind and have to work again with being patient, forgiving, not reacting. You see these mind states arise and cease. But training in noticing that cessation. Remember that Anya Kondanya's insight was all that is of the nature to arise, still the nature to cease. When Asaji was going for alms, and Sariputta, I believe it was, saw him, he knew this monk is enlightened. Asaji was one of the 5 disciples. And he went to and he'd been looking along with Moggallana for a teacher. They'd studied with the best teachers, but they still hadn't found a path to the death person. Sariputta, with very refined faculty, saw this serene, composed monk and thought, he knows. I can tell he knows. So he interrupted him on his alms round. Venerable sir, can I ask you a question? What do you know and who is your teacher? And the monk said, it's not the appropriate time for me to teach or talk. I'm new in the training. He was an arahant. He said he was new in the training. And then Sariputta said, well, just tell it to me in brief. And then Asaji said, I might not get it completely right, but the general gist was, Lord has taught of those conditions which have the nature to arise, those conditions have the nature to cease. And Lord Buddha has taught this. And Sariputta attained to stream entry on hearing that one utterance. So the insight into noticing conditions arise and cease, we have lots of examples in the sutras of people attaining through seeing this. And so when you sit more frequently and when you sit longer, that's what you have a chance to see. A grumpy mind state, you don't want to do it, but you come to the cushion and you do it, and after 10 minutes, the grumpy mind state's gone. There's a willingness to just be there. If you're consistent, you'll really notice that. Look, it's less grumpiness, there's less resistance. I'm okay now. The mind state fell away, it changed. It became contentment. You continue your practice, your contentment deepens. You start to experience some rapture and some tranquility. You notice the arising of rapture, the deepening of rapture into some more deeper sense of serenity, tranquility. You notice the arising and changing of these things, and then you notice the mind coming out of its peacefulness and the first thought, thinking, noting, thinking. You see these things, and when we have a consistent practice, meditating a couple of times a day, that's what gives the mindfulness the integrity, a little bit of samadhi there, to be able to be an eye in the storm that notices arising and ceasing, arising and ceasing. Most people will experience genuine insight, deep level of insight on these meditation retreats. So trying to do a 7 or a 10-day meditation retreat is very valuable. And I had my own first deeply peaceful experience on day 8 of a 10-day meditation retreat, and it changed my life. But if I'd run away on day 4 or day 5 or day 6 or day 7, I would not have had that experience. And that meditation retreat was one of the Goenka Vipassana retreats that required 12 hours of sitting a day. But on day 8, there was a significant result, which changed my life. Mr. Goenkaji said, if you want the results of meditation, it's like anything. Athletes train, performers train, rehearse. Meditators have to train. You should meditate an hour in the morning, an hour at night. So I was 21 when I did that retreat. So I did that for a couple of months, an hour in the morning, an hour at night. Then it became an hour a day after 6 months, and then it became 45 minutes, and then it became 20 minutes. So that's normal, is the resolve fades and the hindrances get in thicker again and the faith wanes a bit. So we have to recognize that, and then we need to get ourselves to a situation where we, recharge it all. You have to kind of claw back the territory in a way. Whatever ignorance and restlessness and laziness and distraction stole from you, you have to claw it back with determined effort. So yes, stream entry is possible. We have to make it probable with consistent, diligent effort, cultivating the 4 foundations of mindfulness. Try to do your retreats, try to do your daily practice, try to increase gently but steadily, rather than having inspired spurts and lazy spurts. Increase by 5 minutes. Next month, increase another 5 minutes. Next month, increase another 5 minutes. And be really determined. You're not going to give those minutes back to Mara. These minutes are offered to the Buddha. So I hope that's something that I said may have been useful or helpful. And if anybody has any questions, I'm happy to try to answer them.
Thank you, Ajahn. Anyone has questions to start with? Okay, I'll start with some that people have sent me. Ajahn, is it possible to attain stream winning without any jhana or nimitta experiences?
So, Ajahn has told me that it is possible to attain to. The way it usually goes for people who don't have the same level of parami as Anya Kondanya or Assaji or Sariputta, the way it usually goes is a person will have a vipassana jnana, an insight knowledge. So that could just be a very, very, very clear seeing of a nityang and a feeling of the self-view falling away for a period of time, a lovely sense of pristine clarity, an experience of knowing a body as just a body without a sense of self present. And that sense of self can fall away for a period of time. Various types of insight knowledges. These are what ripens the mind for the stream entry. And what normally would happen for people who are building the parami, who might not have practiced as heroically as the great disciples, there will begin to be an experience of Nibbana. Ajahn talks about temporary liberation. So a practitioner can experience, Lord Buddha describes that as the place where the 4 elements find no footing. So there's no body, there's no world, there's no 4 elements in that experience, but there is a quality of knowing which knows that it is experiencing liberation. And the practitioner needs to experience that for a long enough period of time that what occurs is called the Gotrabhu Vijnana in Pali, which translates as change of lineage. So a person can have an experience of Nibbana and they know they've seen it. In the experience of Nibbana, there's nobody there who knows they've seen it, that there is a quality of knowing. That the quality of knowing knows that it's experiencing a state with no suffering and no self-view either. But something knows that, and it's very blissful. Then, if the mind experiences it for long enough, Lord Buddha explains that if that person doesn't progress in their practice anymore, before they die, through the power of the merit and the power of that insight, before they die, they will definitely attain to stream entry. If a person continues to practice, then they will have a subsequent experience of Nibbana, or a deeper insight that leads to the experience of Nibbana. So it's often the case that a person sees some anicca, impermanence, very, very clearly, or has an insight into not-self very, very clearly, oftentimes when investigating the nature of the body and the elements, the 4 elements. So when investigating body parts, investigating elements, when Lord Buddha says, find the consciousness with no showing, the space where the 4 elements find no footing, that's the kind of thing that when mindfulness and wisdom sees bones, for example, as earth element really, really clearly, sense of self just falls away. How could earth element be a self? Earth element is just earth element. There's enough mindfulness and clear comprehension to see that stability of mind from samadhi. The mind can experience the consciousness with no showing, or the Nibbana element, the deathless. So if a person continues in their practice, then it's the case that they attain to the path of stream entry. Still not the full path and fruit, but as they continue to practice, then they will get the fruit of stream entry as well. So, and at that point, it's not possible to take more than 7 births. So I think it's good in a way. In a way, we have to drop the agenda. We have to have the aspiration. You have to have the aspiration for arahantship. And then you have to commit to the practices if you really, really mean it. And then you have to drop the time frame. Because the sense of self with an agenda is actually going to be an obstruction. What you need is an insight into not self. So a big sense of self isn't what's going to help get you there. What's going to help get you there is a lot of practice, a lot of faith, a lot of merit. So that's where the consistent practice is important. But in a way, we have to be content with the amount of samadhi that we have, and we have to be content with the amount of the little insights that we have. And then we keep practicing, and what happens is that little bit of samadhi becomes more samadhi, that little bit of insight becomes a deeper insight, and then it usually goes like that. A vipassana jnana, an experience of Nibbana. Obviously, if a person experiences Nibbana, they're going to have an extraordinary quality of faith and confidence in the practice. It's going to give rise to wanting to do more practice, to experience more of that. And then there will be stream entry, the path of stream entry, the change of lineage, the path of stream entry, and then the full path and fruit experience. But all correct practice is going in that direction. But Ajahn does say that if a person has consistent upacara samadhi, so suppose samadhi is here, the jhana samadhi is here. Ajahn says if a person is getting close to it consistently and contemplating correctly, they definitely can have the stream entry experience. But one does have to bring the mind to that upacara, touching on jhana state quite frequently. That's what's going to give the mindfulness and concentration the power to cut through the ignorance and have those insights. And Ajahn also said that after stream entry, jhana will not be difficult. So much delusion fell away from the mind in that experience, and there's so much love and deep faith and respect for Dhamma that the mind inclines towards pure and peaceful states.
Thank you, Ajahn. So just now you mentioned that some of them attain stream entry at their deathbed. So is that through practice or just normal, if they don't practice? Do they still...
So I think the kind of people that could have an experience of having a deepening insight during the death experience are the people who had some insight already. So it's if you've had the change of lineage, temporary experience of Nibbana, then that's the kind of person that when they're dying, that insight will deepen, keeping in mind that oftentimes when people die, they are going to have an excellent opportunity to observe arising and ceasing. You're kind of oftentimes just stuck on a bed, motionless, most people, and all sorts of feelings, and you have a lot of chance to practice. And then if the mindfulness and wisdom is sharp, as the mind has to leave the body, the person is going to notice very significant changes. I think the way it has to happen is you actually letting go of the earth element, the water element, the wind element, the fire element. Yeah. The experience of the mind doing that, it will notice this is different, this is changing, this is a big change that's occurring. And if we're really paying attention, it's a very, very ripe situation for developing insight. But if we have to have made the karmas, what I was talking about earlier about committing to 2 sessions of practice, and then later on when you can committing to 3 sessions of practice, we have to have made a really deep commitment to practice, because that's the attitude, that's the habit that will need to be brought to that experience. Probably most people's experience of death is, I don't want to die, I don't want to die, I don't want to die, I don't want to die. And, this is painful, I don't like pain, I don't like pain, I don't like pain. There's just a huge amount of aversion and resistance. Very difficult to attain to stream entry with a big sense of self full of aversion. So this is, again, one of the benefits of sitting longer sessions is because you have to sit with painful feelings. And if you sit with painful feelings, you develop some patient endurance with pain and develop some capacity to separate that which knows feelings from the feeling without getting irritated and aversive towards them. Incredibly helpful investment to developing insight and having a peaceful death, because oftentimes there's a lot of pain associated with dying, but not always. If people have very supportive merits, I have heard of some very serene and inspiring deaths.
Thank you, Ajahn. I think you have answered this question that someone submitted. How do we attain stream winning when we are so busy with our day jobs? I think you just answered that about commitment.
Well, yeah, so I think it is a matter of prioritizing, isn't it? So yes, I think people are very busy with their day jobs, but you can have a look at how you spend your time and be really, really honest. I think your iPad or your iPhone will tell you how many hours you spent each day on it. And that's a really good thing to have a look at. Oh, I feel like I don't have time to meditate, but my iPad is telling me I spent 6 hours on it today. You might have a little bit of a clue there as to how you might better manage your time. So yes, people are busy, but it's a matter of priorities. Human beings, when they really decide to do something, are capable of quite extraordinary focus. And just look at what Olympic athletes do, just look at what mountain climbers do, just look at what, big wave surfers do. Human beings, when they set their mind to something, can really do extraordinary things. So that's what I'm saying about reclaim the territory slowly and steadily without ever giving any of it back. It's like if you've got to that point where, I have to increase to 10 minutes now, I've made a promise to the Buddha and to Ajahn Achalo, to Ajahn Achalo, I have to increase my 10 minutes. Where am I going to find these 10 minutes? It's like, oh, damn, I guess I can't spend 2 hours on WhatsApp today. It's like, that's what it comes down to. But you reclaim your 10 minutes. Another month goes by, I have to find another 10 minutes. What am I going to do? What am I going to do? What am I going to do? Oh, I guess I can't press snooze twice. I guess I'll only press snooze once. Now, if we're really honest about where those minutes and those hours go, I think many of us will be able to find more time for our practice if we really set the intention. One of the ways, interestingly enough, in the Tibetan tradition, one of the ways that they describe laziness is the laziness of distraction. And I think one of the reasons they call distraction laziness is because you're not doing your spiritual practice. You're lazy with regards to doing your spiritual practice because you're indulging in being distracted. So have a really good look. Where are those moments? Where are the activities which are frivolous and not necessary? And where can you reclaim some territory from Mr. Mara?
Anyone on the floor would like to ask any questions before I have a few more here, but anyone would like to unmute yourself? No? Okay.
Hi, Ajahn.
Okay.
Can I ask a question?
Sure.
Yes, please. Yes, Shunjiang.
Can you explain in detail the difference between parami and merit? Because from what I understand, merit translates to things like happiness, good conditions, or pleasant feelings. But parami seems to be more of qualities in the mind. So is it possible for one's parami to decrease? Yeah, thank you.
So wholesome thoughts, wholesome speech, and wholesome actions are what create merit. So giving something away, dana, it's an action, isn't it? But it has come from a wholesome thought, and then it's become action. And then there's the action of the giving. I think in cultivating any of the 10 parami sincerely, all of that is producing merit. But if there's this idea that, often people do have this idea that if they're very generous, they have this idea that merit is only produced from being generous, so giving things to the monks, to the monasteries, to charities. And people can get into this idea of they might be doing some not very nice things, they might have some bad habits that are getting worse. But there's this idea of, as long as I make merit, I'll be okay. You'll make up for it. You'll make up for the bad stuff by being extra generous or being extra kind to somebody. Like mean to that person, but kind to this person. Stingy towards those people, but generous towards these ones instead. Then yes, if you get into that mind state, your parami can degenerate. So it's good to look at the list, isn't it? What are these 10 perfections, these virtues that Lord Buddha recommends cultivating? And then we see. And the precepts, obviously. So when we break a precept, it's a good, that's a good standard, isn't it? That's a simple way to understand it. When you break a precept, you've made some bad karma. So if you're being generous, but you're not keeping your precepts, then your parami is degenerating. But if you're being generous and keeping your precepts and meditating, then your paramis and your merits are increasing. So one thing that's a little bit difficult to understand is like one of the reasons generosity of merit is the mind is gladdened and brightened. So there is also the effect of helping another person and the brightening of their mind, or the experience of lessening of suffering for a person, or experience of ease for that being. You give the monks the requisites, they can eat for the day, they're not going to have to deal with hunger. You give the monks a robe, they're not experiencing mosquito bites or scratches or these kind of things. And so when we keep our ethical precepts, the mind becomes even more brighter. And it's a hard thing to measure, but that's apparently what's producing the merit, is the more brightness that you allow your mind to shine with, that's producing merit on a different level of karma. So Lord Buddha explains that the mental cultivation produces more merit than the generosity. It's a different type of merit, and the type of merit that comes from mental cultivation is precisely the type of merit that's going to ripen as having insights, having opportunities to practice, meeting teachers and teachings. So we have to have a look, don't we? We have to have a look. What are those 10 parami? We have to have a look. Am I keeping my precepts? We have to have a look. Am I making kind of deals with the Buddha and with Mara? I'll allow myself this because I'll do that. It's like be mean to some people, be stingy to some people, steal from other people, and put someone else out of business and become a monopoly so that you can make a lot of merit with the monks. That might, what will happen is that the bad karma will have the bad things that you do will have negative vipaka, and the good things that you do will have positive vipaka. You don't get out of it. But if you make good karma, what will happen is when you have challenges, other supportive conditions will come to help you through the challenges.
Thank you, Ajahn. Anyone else would like to ask? Please unmute and then you can ask. If no one, I'll go through those who have sent me and too shy to ask. Why do some people attain psychic powers but are unable to attain sotapanna?
I would prefer it if you could give me the example of a person. So it's a kind of a general statement, like which person and what kind of psychic powers. So which individual. It is possible, of course, if a person has, so my understanding of the abhinya, the psychic powers, is the fourth jhana is the standard for having dependable psychic powers. So it's possible that if a person has the fourth jhana, but does not become a stream enterer. They can recollect past lives, read other people's minds, etc. But some of their visions will not be accurate. Only a Buddha's psychic powers are perfectly dependable. So if a person attains to the enlightened state, then the visions and the psychic powers there's much less cloudedness or darkness or ignorance affecting it, so it's much more accurate. But even among the enlightened beings, there's some margin of error. Only a Buddha is 100% accurate with his psychic powers. But yes, if a person has a gift with samadhi, it's quite possible. And if a person has that kind of gift with samadhi, it might be the case that they have some kind of long-term aspiration to be a great disciple, to be a Buddha, to be a monk with full psychic powers, because those kind of aspirations take longer, more lifetimes.
Thank you, Ajahn. Another question is, can people from other religions who meditate attain stream winning?
No. Unless they are contemplating. I mean, it depends. Let's say yes. People practicing other religions, can they attain stream entry? Yes, if they're contemplating either impermanence, unsatisfactoriness, or not self, because it'll be an insight into one of the three characteristics that will lead to that. So if there are practitioners who are meditating a lot and who begin to pay attention to arising and cessation, quite possible. Yeah.
Thank you, Ajahn. Another question is, in today's world, are there many stream enterers?
Well, if I was the Buddha, I'd be able to tell you. Unfortunately, I'm not yet the Buddha, so I can't tell you. But I personally know of some. But in terms of telling you an actual amount, I can't do that. Sorry.
Thank you, Ajahn. Someone else asked if...
I'll tell you something. I'll tell you something that I think you'll find encouraging. Since most of the people on the screen are women that I'm looking at, Ajahn Jamnian from what comes to in Krabi province in southern Thailand told me that he meets more lay women stream enterers these days than monk stream enterers. So the only reason I say that to you, now I'm assuming that Ajahn Jamnian has a good set of very diligent lay women practitioners there to be saying this. And Thailand does have a nice little army of determined, high faith, shooting from the hip, generous, ethics keeping, multiple times a day meditating lay women. So anyway, it was an interesting thing to... And then he said, but there are more men who are arahants. So.
That's a good one, Ajahn.
Stream entry is... faith does play another large factor, and women do have a capacity to have a very fully embodied heart-like quality of faith, and faith gives rise to a lot of energy. So if a woman knows how to channel her faith into a lot of energetic, consistent practice, then yeah, there's a lot of energy there. I can't hear you, sorry. Yeah.
Sorry, I was muted. Sis Michelle just asked a question. Is it better to attain stream entry than to follow the Bodhisattva path?
That's a trick question. Let me have a sip of water while I consider. Well, I'm going to answer this question with a statement rather than an answer. Understanding that the Bodhisattva path is longer, harder. If you are the type of person who is already practicing extremely diligently, more diligent than anyone else that you know, then for you, perhaps the Bodhisattva path is best, because you will help many, many people. But if you say that you're a Bodhisattva practitioner so that you can feel like you're not in a hurry, you have millions more lives, there's no hurry, that's not going to work. And you better aspire to arahantship. At least that's my take on it.
I think the person is referring to the Bodhisattva path of the Mahayana tradition.
I think for a person who's really deeply committed to that path, I don't think they will have doubts about it, actually. They will just know, this is the path I'm on, this is what I have to do. And if a person does have genuine doubts about it, then that probably means they're not yet deeply committed to that path, and they need to make a decision. Sometimes people can't make a decision, and that's okay too. You just practice. That should manifest then as practicing as much as possible, so that you can get the clarity that you need to make your decision. Because none of these, possible, yes, when we talk about probable, depends on the effort and the consistency. Generally, it's understood that it's not easy. So if we can be clear in our aspiration, that will be helpful. Then we know at least what we're aiming for.
Anyone on the floor would like to ask? Because I have, I think, 3 more questions here for Ajahn. Anyone wants a chance to ask Ajahn? No?
Nice, easy questions, please.
Yes. I think this is easy, but you may say you don't know her. Saints like Mother Teresa, are they enlightened?
Yeah, even then, I didn't know Mother Teresa personally, so I don't know if she was a saint. I don't know that. And but enlightened, by enlightened, that would mean to Buddhists that greed, hatred, and delusion has been significantly uprooted. So, if a person still doesn't have an insight into not self, by the Buddhist definition of a saint, an enlightened being, they're not there yet. But can people in other traditions have extremely virtuous, noble qualities and benefit a lot of people? Of course. I think Gandhi would be a good example of a modern person who was bodhisattva-like, but he had great faith in a creator God.
I think I can combine these 2 questions. Someone asked, since it takes so long to get to stream winning, should we just enjoy our lives then? Another person said, Ajahn, is there any advice to give our friends who constantly tells themselves that achieving stream winning is not for them in this life?
So, since stream entry seems to take a long time, essentially should we just give up and try to enjoy our life? So, I actually think it's a fair enough question to ask if you only had this life. What you need to understand is that the Bodhisattva path, as we were talking about, is millions of lives long. Seems like a very long time. if you don't ever get around to sowing the causes for your liberation, you might not be on the bodhisattva path, but you're going to have more than millions of lives. So it's not the case that it's just this life and that's too hard, so I'll just go with death when death comes and I won't bother trying to become a saint. After death comes rebirth, old age, sickness and death, old age, sickness and death, birth, old age, sickness, death, birth, old age, sickness, death, birth, old age, sickness and death. So that person has to ask themselves, how many more times do you want to be born? How many more times do you want the first day of school? How many more times do you want mumps, measles, diarrhea, colds, flus? How many more times do you want to live with parents, one of them breaks up with the other? How many more times do you want to go through adolescence fighting with your parents? How many more times do you want to have an arranged marriage, since that's the norm in the world? How many more times do you want to have debilitating diseases? How many more times do you want to experience war, famine, separation from the loved, association with the disliked? Your karmic enemies, the people who hate you, how many more times do you want to get in conflicts with them? And so, yeah, if never-ending birth, old age, sickness and death, association with the disliked and separation from the liked is something that you think you might enjoy, then yeah, no need to practice. But if never-ending birth, old age, sickness and death, separation from the loved and association with the disliked isn't something that you want to experience for eternity, then you have to start sowing the causes now.
Thank you, Ajahn. I have a last question here. Ajahn, how extensive is karma and its results? If all karma comes from intention, then how about pressing lift buttons and other daily acts? All these stem from intention. Do these innocent acts generate karma?
Yeah, they do. So you have wholesome karma, unwholesome karma, and neutral karma. So doing things like pressing a lift button is probably generating neutral karma. And then neutral karma will manifest as neutral feelings. So it's like sometimes you meditate, you're not particularly suffering and you're not particularly pleasant, but it's just kind of okay. It's kind of neutral. So your neutral, all of your neutral actions will manifest as somewhat neutral feelings. And how extensive is it? Yes, everything you think, everything you say, everything you do is creating karma. And that's why if we can get conscious of that and consciously develop wholesome karma, Lord Buddha explains that punya is synonymous with happiness. You will experience conditions which are conducive to experiencing happiness. There are other types of karma, so it's not just an individual's karma. We share a group karma as well, and different activities that you've been doing with different beings, sometimes many, many lifetimes ago. So I think a large part of the world has gone through, and is still going through, a fairly traumatic experience with the COVID situation. And that's part of our shared group karma. And people who may have more types of supportive merits are possibly affected less. And people which had less supportive merits are affected more. But that's a kind of a group karma.
Thank you, Ajahn. I think Sis Michelle just put on the chat group that can a stream enterer switch to a bodhisattva path in later lives?
No. So this is where I think the later teachings in Mahayana, at least the way I understand it, and I've had discussions with someone I believe to be an arahant. I'm basing my opinion on that. So the way that a person becomes an arahant is by letting go of their attachment to conditions. The only way that a person can experience arahantship is letting go of attachment. So for a person to have let go of attachment, the idea that that liberated mind could then decide to be attached again, it's the arahant who I discussed this with said, I understand the bodhisattvas, but they don't understand me. So he understood that a bodhisattva might practice similar practices for longer, the only remaining attachment being concern for the well-being of others. That's the only attachment a genuine bodhisattva has. So stream entry, one has to aspire to be an arahant to attain stream entry. And once you've done it, it's like the deal is done. You've already stream entry, you've dived in. You've dived into the Nibbana element. And within 7 lives, the mind will be completely experiencing Nibbana and having let go of its attachment to all conditions. So I don't think it's possible to come back from that. Although I know Mahayana texts say that in the future the arahants will have to come back and become Buddhas. The Lord Buddha in the 84,000 Dhamma verses in the Pali canon never said that once. And the first time that those kind of statements started appearing, if you look at when those texts originated, I think you will find that they are 1,000 years later. Whether you decide that you believe that or not, that's your choice. But to me, it doesn't make sense. But if a person wants to be a bodhisattva, great. Benefit many beings, wonderful, sadhu, sadhu, sadhu. But the idea that someone who has entered the stream of Nibbana with the aspiration to be an arahant could undo that. It's like once you've attained to the unconditioned through letting go of attachment to the conditions, that's how a person attains to the unconditioned. It's by letting go of attachment to the conditions. That's the process. I don't think you can then decide that you're going to reattach to conditions. You let them go already. So, and I don't have the vision of samsara. I don't have the vision of the nature of Buddha's minds and the ultimate potential of arahants. I can't say that from my own insight. But I did discuss it with somebody who I believe is an arahant, and that's what he said, and it made sense to me.
Thank you, Ajahn. Can we unmute and say 3 sadhus?
Sadhu, sadhu, sadhu. Thank you, Ajahn.
Thank you, Ajahn.
Ajahn,
Sukhi hotu.
Invite you to share merits with our sentient beings before we close.
Okay. For those who know the chant, please join in. Through the goodness that arises from my practice, may my spiritual teachers and guides of great virtue, my mother, my father, and my relatives, the sun and the moon, and all virtuous leaders of the world, may the highest gods and evil forces, celestial beings, guardian spirits of the earth, and the Lord of death, may those who are friendly, indifferent, or hostile, may all beings receive the blessings of my life. May they soon attain the threefold bliss and realize the deathless through the goodness that arises from my practice. And through this act of sharing, may all desires and attachments quickly cease, and all harmful states of mind, until I realize Nibbana in every kind of birth. May I have an upright mind, with mindfulness and wisdom, austerity and vigor. May the forces of delusion not take hold, nor weaken my resolve. The Buddha is my excellent refuge. Unsurpassed is the protection of the Dhamma. The solitary Buddha is my noble Lord. The Sangha is my supreme support. Through the supreme power of all these, may darkness and delusion be dispelled.
Sadhu.
Thanks again, Ajahn, for
Thank you, Ajahn.
sharing your wise wisdom with us.
I wish you all the best in your mental cultivation.
Thank you, Ajahn. Good night, Ajahn.
Okay.
Night, Ajahn.
Thank you for the encouragement.
Thank you.
Thank you everybody for tuning in. Next week, we have Bhante Buddha Rakita from Africa, who will be giving a talk on cultivating peace in a chaotic world. Do stay tuned.